Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Do you hear me? Caleb? Caleb?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Hello, good afternoon from here.
Thank you. I wanted to be sure that you can hear me. I think we can start our webinar. We welcome you to this webinar organized as part of activities to commemorate the World No Tobacco Day 2022 in Africa. As we all know, the World No Tobacco Day is observed every year and primarily aims to inform the public on the dangers of using tobacco, the business practices of tobacco companies, what the World Health Organization is doing to fight against the use of tobacco, and what people around the world can do to claim their right to health and healthy living and to protect future generations. This year, the day is commemorated under the theme, Tobacco, Threat to the Environment. The harmful impact of the tobacco industry on the environment is vast and adds unnecessary pressure to our planet's already scarce resources and fragile ecosystems. Tobacco growing, manufacturing, and use poison our water, our soil, our beaches, and our city streets with chemicals, with toxic waste, with cigarette butts, including microplastics and e-cigarette waste. These environmental damages come as an addition to the over 8 million people being killed by use of tobacco every year, not to mention those also affected by the secondary or second-hand smoking. So the tobacco industry makes huge profit by destroying the environment and our health, and we must make it accountable and responsible for all these damages. This webinar, therefore, will shed light on exactly how the tobacco industry damages the environment and what we can do to make the industry account for the destruction it causes. It is organized under the banner of the Clean Up Campaign, an initiative of civil society organizations, regional and global partners involved in tobacco control. These partners include the African Tobacco Control Alliance, ATCA, the African Capacity Building Foundation, the African Center, the African Center for Tobacco Industry Monitoring and Policy Research, ATIM, the Center for Tobacco Control in Africa, CTCA, the Framework Convention Alliance, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control. So as we proceed with this webinar, please note that as there is simultaneous interpretation and it is provided in both English and French. You can therefore go to the interpretation icon to choose your language of preference. Also, the webinar is being recorded in both English and French, and both recordings will be made available to everyone who have registered for this webinar. So in terms of the structure of the webinar, we shall have our keynote address, and then we're going to have 3 sessions. Session 1, that should focus on environmental losses of tobacco compared to gains to the tobacco industry. Then session 2 will focus on pitfalls of applying standard corporate environment solutions to the tobacco industry. And the last session will be case study dealing with tobacco industry and greenwashing. We shall also have question and answer session. So if you have your question, you can write it on the question and answer chat, or you can keep it for the session for the question and answer session. So as we have already established, tobacco has an enormous impact on the environment from cultivation to production, distribution, and waste. The tobacco industry contributes to climate change and reduces climate resilience, wasting resources and damaging ecosystems. This is a public health problem whose solution is intricately linked to the environment. So it is important that environmental specialists are associated with our campaign. So allow me to introduce our speaker who's going to give us the keynote address. I understand Mr. Alexander Mangwiro is with us today. If he has joined already, please, over to you, Mr. Alexander Mangwiro.
Bettina, unfortunately, Mr. Alexander has not joined us yet. So I think we can go ahead with this presentation.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you, Caleb. So we'll keep note. Once he joins, please let me know so that he can come at whatever point we can give him the floor to give us the opening remarks. So we move forward with our program for the webinar. So we start with our session 1. So let us now talk about the heavy environmental losses incurred because of tobacco, from its cultivation to its transformation. We have heard that tobacco production and consumption damage the environment, and that tobacco destroys the forests, deforestation, and the like. So we want to understand now, to what extent does this damage that we all know about, how significant is it compared to the profits made by the tobacco industry from this environmental destruction? Let's hear more about this from someone who is so uniquely placed to provide a better understanding. That is Mr. Akim Bode Oluwafemu. He is a former executive director of the Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria. Bode, as he is fondly called in the tobacco control community, is a Nigerian environmental activist, a social justice campaigner, and an avid tobacco control advocate. He is currently the Executive Director of Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa, CAPA, and President of the Board of the Directors of the Africa Tobacco Control Alliance, ATCA. Welcome, Bode. Over to you, Mr. Bode. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bettina, and thanks, ATCA, for organizing this very important webinar. I'm going to be speaking both as an environmentalist and as a tobacco control advocate. We all know that tobacco harms the human person. The tobacco consumption, tobacco use damages human beings. But it is also instructive for us to now begin to see how much the tobacco industry is also damaging our environment. The reality is that our planet is under threat as a result of tobacco farming, tobacco production, tobacco consumption. We must begin to draw the nexus, the linkages between tobacco production and climate change. And while tobacco is primarily a public health issue, we also must link up to begin to see how are we going to rein tobacco industry from further destruction of the environment, just like we are reining them in from further killing of our people. And so we have to begin to engage ourselves about the possibility of legal, administrative, and sometimes cultural instruments to begin to hold tobacco companies accountable for their environmental destruction. In its entire process, tobacco farming, tobacco production, and tobacco consumption, they are all harming the environment. The entire tobacco cycle in itself destroys the environment. Take, for instance, the issue of tobacco farming. When you have ever visited tobacco farming, you will know that tobacco growing is one of the most chemical intensive farming, exercise, you can embark on. It's a chemicals. You know, they use a lot of herbicides, fungicides. And because tobacco in itself are very delicate, and there is a way the leaves must come out for them to be able to have what they call fine tobacco. And so because of the massive introduction of these chemicals into the environment by farming, it also destroys the ecosystem. It reduces soil fertility. But beyond that is the fact that about 600 million trees are cut annually for processes that includes what they call tobacco curing. And I think our friends from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, will be able to understand this better. Yes, there's also tobacco curing going on in Nigeria, in a section of our country called the Okeogun area. What does this entail? When the tobacco leaves are harvested, they are then packed into a barn, and then you use what we Africans call firewood. They pack stalks of wood into those to be able to kind of dry the leaves and make them turn out in the way they want them to be. About 22 trillion liters of water are used in the tobacco business globally. There are about 4.5 trillion cigarette butts when we come to consumption in itself. And of course, we know how tobacco consumption harms people who consume tobacco products. Similarly, for consumption, it's also the issue of environmental tobacco smoke. But I must say this, which I believe a few of some of us know about, that the tobacco butts in itself are not biodegradable, which means that even when you smoke and you throw them on the environment, anywhere you place them, you know, even if they break into pieces, they are not just easy to, they're not going to go back into the natural states. And in its entirety, about 84 million tons of CO2 emissions occur into the atmosphere as a result of tobacco companies' operation globally. What does this entails for us? Yes, we have agreed that it is a public health issue. It then shows us that the tobacco companies have significantly been contributing to problems of climate change. And so while we know the human cost of tobacco consumption, there is also the huge environmental cost that this industry is inflicting on us. Oh, of course, we already know some of the problems that climate change would cause. You know, extreme weather patterns, you know, flash floods, deforestation, and the rest of them. But most significantly, when you are having climate discourse, is the issue of how African countries are not even prepared to be able to adapt, there is no resilience, and we are at the receiving end of climate change in itself. So it's going to be like double jeopardy for us as Africans if we don't begin from now to begin to look at how do we raise awareness about the connection between tobacco and the environment, and how to mobilize ourselves as Africans in terms of holding the tobacco industry accountable. And that is why the theme of this year, World No Tobacco Day, is extremely important: tobacco and the environment, which means essentially that while we are primarily a tobacco control group, how do we begin to link up? How do we begin to use this science that is available to us? How do we begin to escalate discourse around how tobacco production, tobacco consumption, and tobacco farming, most importantly, harm the environment? I think that is our responsibility, to begin to connect, either as African groups with environmental groups in our different countries. Then we begin to escalate to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. These are the important points that we need to look today. If you go into exactly the question for this session, how do we quantify the environmental losses vis-a-vis whatever profit is coming to the tobacco companies? We all know that if we measure the human costs of tobacco smoking vis-a-vis the private benefits that goes into the shareholders of tobacco companies, the global economy is losing about $1 trillion every year. This is what this industry is inflicting on us, and many more by the way of the sinking frontier communities that will happen as a result of tobacco companies' contribution to climate change. This is exactly what I think we should begin to look at, and that is what this session is all about. I think, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akim Bode, for illustrating and highlighting to us the effects of tobacco throughout the whole chain, that is from production to smoking. You have illustrated to us the effects of the chemical, the agrochemicals, the negative spillover effects of these agrochemicals to the soil, to the environment, the effects of deforestation. You really illustrated the number of trees, 600 million trees. That is really scaring, I think, to think of it, that we are losing so much in terms of deforestation. And also, you also highlighted the quantification of these environmental losses, that is through the human cost versus the benefit that this industry is having. We can see that there is lots of benefits to the industry than to the human to the humanity, that is in terms of what the people are suffering because of smoking. Thank you once again. Thank you very much, Bode. We'll come back to you after the next speaker for the experience sharing moment. Thank you very much once again. So our next speaker is Debbie Tsai, Head of Global Public Policy and Strategy at the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control, GGTC. Debbie is a global healthy lawyer with a background in economics. She provides technical assistance on health promotion, good governance, product regulation, tax and development financing, including illicit trade, as well as international trade and investment. She will enlighten us on how to render the tobacco industry accountable for the damages it causes to the environment, and also why we must not apply standard corporate environment solutions to the industry. Welcome, Debbie. Over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
All right, thank you. I'm trying to share my screen. I hope you can see it now. Yes,
it's clear.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Bettina. Thank you for first of all, thank you to the to ATCA for organizing this very, very timely event. I will talk about a bit more generally on the tobacco industry and the environment. Hold on, I have a problem moving my screen. Hold on. Okay, so we'll start with what we already know. Tobacco companies' so-called CSR initiatives divert attention from tobacco's devastating impact on the environment. And a good example would be tree planting. What the public sees is that the tobacco companies undertake tree planting activities and then take credit for reducing deforestation and then, saying that they support the community. What the tobacco industry hides is that tobacco production accounts for 5% of global deforestation, and this could be up to 30% in tobacco growing countries. Another example is when tobacco companies claim to support sustainable agriculture by removing or reducing pesticide use. And you heard earlier from Bode harmful this pesticide use is. So here you see Philip Morris saying that they buy tobacco leaves where residues attributable to certain toxins as classified by international agencies have not been detected. The pesticides are actually regarded by the tobacco industry as essential to tobacco production. And as to the pesticide residue limits that's set by agencies, which the tobacco companies are using as baseline, well, the tobacco industry has a history of undermining these regulations and lobbying for higher maximum residue limits through third parties. What's worse is that the tobacco industry provides easy access to interest-free loans that make it easier to procure more pesticides for tobacco. The tobacco industry's public relations strategies do not only obscure the environmental harms, but also obscure the solutions to it. The FCTC recommends shifting away from tobacco because this would prevent green tobacco sickness. This would prevent the soil from being stripped of nutrients, which leads to food insecurity, and so on and so forth. The FCTC also calls for tax increases, which is relevant to the environment if we treat it as a means of internalizing the costs of environmental harms. But as we all know, the tobacco industry resists tax increases vehemently. Tobacco companies make tobacco farming look attractive, painting tobacco farming as a profitable venture. And instead of steering tobacco farmers away from tobacco production, the tobacco companies give token donations and loans, then financial support to farmers. And these loans and so-called CSR activities actually just keep farmers and workers more dependent on tobacco and perpetuate a cycle of debt, making it impossible to shift to other livelihoods, effectively undermining this treaty-based solution to diversify. But each of the major transnational tobacco companies have been so successful in their public relations activities that they receive recognition from sustainability groups like Carbon Disclosure Project. Unfortunately, in the past few years alone, there's far more coverage for stories about these awards than the stories of what is actually happening on the ground. Tobacco continues to be produced by children because tobacco companies are not paying enough for tobacco leaves. Tobacco production continues to massively cost deforestation. Cigarette butts continue to have toxic residue and remain the most littered item in the planet. Organisms and life forms in water and land continue to be harmed by these toxic cigarette butts. In the end, the CSR activities conducted by tobacco companies or their front groups would eventually drown out the voices of farmers and workers impacted the most by these environmental and social harms. Tobacco workers' unions have raised this concern at the ILO in the past, but we hardly heard that too. There has been a recent trend to make tobacco pay as polluters. The EU countries have applied a polluters pay tax on tobacco products because of the plastics found in cigarette butts. From 2015 to 2020, single-use plastics regulations around the world have doubled. Even the number of global initiatives and entities have increased exponentially. In March 2022, just a few months ago, the UN Environment Assembly have endorsed a global plastics treaty and negotiations processes have started. Over 100 countries have focused regulations and bans on shopping bags and food packaging because these plastics are used only once but last a long time in the environment. These single-use plastics degrade into microplastics that may be ingested by marine organisms and animals. This would cause their death and ultimately find their way into human beings through the food chain. Many countries have embraced the Extended Producer Responsibility Approach, EPR, making the industry pay for a certain fee for waste management and allowing it to be responsible for take-back programs, recycling programs, and awareness-raising programs. In some cases, these are undertaken in partnership with a government agency or a government-endorsed entity. In the EU, EPR is adopted for tobacco product waste, and the way that it is implemented in some countries like France and Italy, it has been observed that it allows the tobacco industry to promote itself as a good corporate citizen. This is inappropriate because tobacco products provide no benefit to humanity or the economy. Cigarette filters have plastic fibers that cause cancer. Cigarette butts carry toxic residue that can kill organisms, and the tobacco industry should not be treated like any industry, in accordance with Article 5.3 of the FCTC. Imposing social responsibility obligations such as EPR to a tobacco producer could undermine tobacco control policies, especially when it portrays the tobacco industry positively or allow some form of so-called CSR to be done. In most countries, CSR is already banned. Now, to allow us to start a conversation on this, GGTC, as a partner of STOP, in collaboration with local NGOs in most countries, produced country briefings entitled, "How Should Tobacco Companies Pay for Their Pollution?" This is intended to quantify this one small aspect of tobacco's harm to the environment. We looked at two types of costs based on available data from the World Bank and WWF. The cost of managing the cigarette filters and product packaging waste, which includes collecting them, sorting them, placing them in landfills. And we also looked at the cost of economic, societal, and ecosystem losses when tobacco plastics enter the oceans. Ecosystem loss includes losses in terms of food and recreational benefits, the ability to control the climate and diseases, and to support nutrient cycles and oxygen production. And this is estimated throughout the time the plastic remains in the ocean. For the African region, it is estimated that 620 million per year is the lifetime cost to the society, environment, and the economy of plastics from cigarettes consumed annually. This estimate does not account for environmental harms from toxic chemicals and metals released by cigarette butts. The cost of managing tobacco product package waste in the African region is estimated at $22 million per year. The Global Tobacco Control Treaty could provide guidance on environmental interventions such as eliminating single-use plastics like cigarette filters. Reducing smoking would be a triple win for health, the environment, and the economy. The tobacco industry should not be a partner in any environmental endeavor and must be held accountable for the costs of environmental harms. And this can come in the form of taxes or other mandatory charges that could also pay for research to help estimate the extent of harms. Cigarette butts should be dealt with as single-use plastics of a toxic nature that must be eliminated. Tobacco companies must not be allowed to use extended producer responsibility to promote its so-called corporate social responsibility. For more information, download the STOP country briefing at tobacco plastics at ggtc.world and the issue briefs at STOP's website. And if you have questions, please contact us at ggtc.world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for such interesting and comprehensive presentation that really touched on a number of things from the corporate social responsibility in terms of what the industry is doing, the issues related to the pesticide regulation, the issues related to the debt cycle, that is that the farmers are finding it difficult to diversify in terms of crop production because they are linked to the debt cycle, the issue of child labor, the issue of friend groups that are being used as farmers' voices. And I think that is very critical for us to understand how these, and also identify these friend groups. You also talked about the microplastics and their negative effects to the marine life, including to the human life. You also enlightened us on the extended producer responsibility and that the TI should not be allowed to use it as a form of the corporate social responsibility. And the action to be taken, I think, is the way forward. We appreciate the action related to taxes, action related to research, as well as excluding the TI, tobacco industry, from the use of the extended producer responsibility. We really appreciate, Debbie. Thank you very much. So as we mentioned earlier, we are coming back to you, Bode, for an experience sharing moment. Despite all what has been discussed here today, the tobacco industry is known to portray itself as environmentally friendly, a practice that is widely known as greenwashing. The industry has invested heavily to greenwash its environmentally damaging practices by reporting environmental impact and funding environmental corporate social responsibility projects and organizations. Their smokescreen is only able to work due to lack of an objective data, as well as limited and inconsistent legislation at international and local levels. You have been at the forefront of exposing, denouncing, and isolating tobacco industry interference in Nigeria and even globally. We would love then to hear an example or two of cases of tobacco industry greenwashing that you have encountered and how you have dealt with these cases. Over to you. The floor is yours, Bode, please. Thank you.
Thanks again, Bettina. Well, for you to be successful in tobacco control, you must be able to monitor the industry in all ramifications. And their corporate social responsibility, it's one of those major issues that we have been monitoring. If you go back to number one, the current BAT logo, global logo, which I think they changed around 2019 or thereabout. The change of logo itself for BAT, for me, marks the beginning of response, greenwash response on issues of tobacco control, not on tobacco control, but particularly on looking at the future. When you look at that logo, they say better tomorrow, makes you to think futuristic, that this company is changing its use. I mean, it's changing its approach to everything. And before then, BAT, I'm limiting myself to BAT because that's the corporation we monitor so much in Nigeria. And I believe this applied to several other tobacco companies. Used to publish what they call the social report. And that social report was listed, I'm sorry, around 2009 for what they call sustainability group report. And from that kind of process, they have been trying to repackage themselves to look more friendly, either in issues of health or even in environment. That gave us, I mean, that led to what they now call the environmental governance management system or whatever report. What are they trying to tell us when you go through that sequence is that they are again trying to portray tobacco companies as normal companies. We are even responding to climate change. We are even looking at how to conduct our business in a sustainable manner. We are looking at issues of climate change. And I'll come back to the response of climate change. But back to the specifics of this question, what are the greenwashing activities that they have done in Nigeria? I will say clearly that the one that they have done the most has been what they call the reforestation program. And so BAT is known for cutting so much wood for its operation, which we have challenged. And then they sign agreements about tree planting. You know, so they ceremoniously will go every year and plant trees until we challenge them, and I think they have rested that. But added to that is the fact that while we as environmentalists are shouting that, look, you are contributing to climate change, you are contributing to low productivity on the farms, you are destroying the environment, they now so went ahead to sign an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, which is to say, look, we are not responsible for, the climate change, but we are ready to help. And that what is causing low yield is because Nigerian farmers don't have access to adequate data on weather patterns. So it's not about stopping weather patterns. I mean, it's stopping climate change. It's about getting information to farmers. Those are the kind of forced solutions that they have tried to advance in Nigeria. British American, again, for instance, does what we call the Farmers' Day. And then they will say we are supporting smallholder farmers. So why tobacco cultivation is leading to low farm yields, because where tobacco is cultivated in Nigeria is what we call the food basket of Nigeria. And they are diverting the attention of these farmers from cultivating food into tobacco. They now create false solutions of saying they are celebrating farmers, and they will bring them to the cities. And of course, when they do this, what they do principally is to divert government attention from the solution, is to begin to paint themselves as a responsible, quote unquote, organization. So they bring farmers to cities, and then they get the media to, have photo opportunities. But most importantly is that the tobacco companies that are disrupting the environment, again, are using greenwashing the environment to get government to sit on the table. How? When they want to sign this agreement, some of the agencies that are even involved in implementing laws that has to do with tobacco control, in protecting the environment, are some of them that sit down on the table with the tobacco companies. Now, back to their general and corporate response to the issue of climate change. BATN, if you go on their website, is one of the corporations in the world that is promoting net zero. Net zero in itself is a scam designed by all multinationals and the rest of them to divert attention from the real solution of climate change. What is the real solution? Cut emission at source. Net zero tend to tell you that, look, no, you can continue to, marketize carbon, continue to look at it from the perspective of you can pollute here and then you can then plant tree there. Whereas the entire globe in itself is one and the same. One critical aspect of the greenwashing in its totality back to Nigeria has been the creation of what is called the British American Tobacco Foundation. Now, this foundation, quote unquote, by BAT, is an independent foundation. So way before Philip Morris established Smoke-Free Foundation, BAT, as in Nigeria, has run similar strategy. Now, for us in Nigeria, it's actually double jeopardy, because this foundation is set up from proceeds of the operations of BATN, not after tax. Whatever the foundation is doing, BATN costs it as part of their production costs. What does this foundation do? This foundation put up adverts asking for CSOs, environmental groups, asking for whatever to apply and get funding to be able to do corporate social responsibility activities. These are several of the practices of the Black Academy initiatives of programs that they have designed that essentially try to paint them, because the language of greenwashing actually comes from the environmentalist movement. When advocates around the world challenges the few days, they are now greener than green. They are the ones that talk most about energy transition. They talk most about renewable energy, but they will never tell you that they were going to stop fossil fuel production distribution around the world. Similarly, why BATN is signing this agreement with governments. In fact, I just remember that they also signed an agreement for recycling. One other thing that we must monitor in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, is that apart from the fanfare of signing this agreement, you hardly see any other activity. Apart from this, they bring them to the city, they sign an agreement, that's the rest of it. That's the last we ever heard of it. So this mechanism, as I said earlier, was borrowed from the fossil fuel industry to divert attention from what essentially we are supposed to be talking about now, which is, since we now know that tobacco companies are significantly contributing to climate change by emitting 84 megatons of carbon dioxide annually, it is then the time for us to turn this greenwashing against them. And I think, as Debbie mentioned, to begin to evoke the polluters pay principle, to begin to look at what other countries have done and begin to reenact those kind of measures on the African continent and never be carried away by those greenwashing and by attempts by the tobacco industry to dilute and diffuse and make us lose focus to how they have been harming our environment and, of course, escalating climate change, which will have extreme negative impact on the continent. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Bode, for enlightening us on this greenwashing concept and making us understand the case study in Nigeria on what the BAT has done in terms of doing the greenwashing, doing the reforestation program, sitting on the table with the government and trying to derail and be destructive and also negatively affect the efforts being put by the tobacco control. We are very thankful for that, and it is very, very interesting what you've just shared with us. So it is now time to address the questions that have been coming in during this webinar. I can see that on the chat, a number of questions have been put up. So please feel free to raise up your hand or write on the chat. And at this juncture, I'm pleased to invite Fatou Diouf of the Framework Convention Alliance to join me on this session. Hi, Fatou. So please, if you may raise your hand, put up your questions on the question and answer platform so that we go on the question and answer discussion at this moment now. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Bettina.
Hi, Fatou. Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to Atka, and you're doing a great job moderating. I saw that there was a question. There's a comment and a question. The first comment was from Mr. Gay from Listab that wrote a comment on the fact that is interfering. They pretty much are always interfering. That's something that they're very known for. He also states that, it is also the government's responsibility to make sure that, Article 5.3 is respected, that certain commitments are also respected, and that the leaders aren't in complicity with the industry. It's also up to civil society to make sure to denounce both tobacco industry and government if it's in that case. The second question, we got a question from Salou. So I will read that question. I guess either Debbie or Bode can go ahead and answer that question. Well, actually, it's actually geared towards Bode. So Bode, if you could answer this question. He thanks you for your presentation and had the opportunity to see you in South Africa. He's pretty much asking, is there any data on air pollution that is caused by smoking shisha?
Okay, so do I just answer that question now?
Yes, I believe you can, since we're in the question.
Well, let me say for our local environment, I know there's a study currently going on by some scientists in the university that has not matured. Hopefully, that in itself, we are waiting for, and as soon as that data come up, I don't think there is any yet that I'm aware of, also in the continent. I don't know whether ATCA is, well, I'm also speaking for ATCA, is aware of any data, but I know there are ongoing studies, but I don't think, particularly on shisha, not yet. It's something very interesting that we should look at.
Thank you. I believe that should answer his question. Any other questions? Okay, so we got one from Linda Asaba. She states that one of the issues leading to dragging tobacco control activities is the lack of stable and sustainable funding. How do we, as tobacco control advocates, ensure that we have a stable and sustainable funding for tobacco control? I will open that up to either Debbie or Bode, or even Bettina if she wants to answer this.
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Bode.
No, I actually wanted to pass it on to Bettina because Bettina is a funder here. I'm not. Oh, I'm Fatu.
I'm a moderator. My capacity is a moderator today. If I am Bode. Anyway, I may partially try to say something. Thank you. I think it was from Solu, is it? Solu.
Salut.
Okay, thank you on the question on funding, or Linda, I said Linda, sorry,
Yeah.
on funding sustainability. I think this is a complex question and very, very difficult to answer. But what we can say, we understand that funding for tobacco control in Africa is very much limited. It's a real scarce resource. We try to support and encourage the resource mobilization at country level, especially through the operationalization or establishment of the tobacco control funds in some of the countries, especially where the tobacco control fund has been established. We really encourage support of the public health programs. It might not necessarily be tobacco control, but let it be a public health, so that at least the tobacco control will be embedded in those programs. So we are happy where the tobacco control funds have been established, I think in a number of countries like Senegal, Gabon, Botswana, and I understand Botswana is in the process of, I mean, as an example, is in the process of operationalizing and implementing the tobacco control fund that is through the call for proposals. So this is something that we would want other countries to emulate. Even the civil society organizations also advocate for that in the respective countries, because much as external resources might come, the sustainability will only be there if there is national or fiscal resources coming through the fiscal budget. Then there will be sustenance of these tobacco control programs at country level, and also partnerships. Because sustainability might not necessarily be in monetary value, but partnerships with other public health programs at country level, it also helps to make sure that we move forward to fight this giant, the tobacco industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bettina. I think you said it all. I think that COVID also came in and showed us that in a matter of seconds, a lot of things can change, right? That a lot of government in the region, or even civil society organizations, sometimes rely on international funding. And when things then happen, we see that they don't get the necessary funding that they need. So it is very important to get domestic revenue that is for tobacco control, and ensuring that it is sustainable. You also spoke about technical resources, which is very important, or human resources, not just monetary resources. And I believe in Deborah's presentation, she even spoke a bit about how taxation, right? And this is something at FCA that we're trying to work on, is to ensure that there's like an increase in taxation in order to fund tobacco control programs, right? In order to ensure that it is sustainable. So not to take too much time, I don't know if Deborah, you wanted to speak on this subject before we go to the next question.
Right. Thank you, Fatou. Just wanted to maybe add, but you've said it, the FCTC is really one good basis to impose these taxes. And I think it's a matter of prioritization. If we start with taxes, then there is a chance that there could be funding. I think we are very, very lucky. This is probably the only treaty that had provided guidelines that sort of suggests, right, and not just, mandates sort of increasing the taxes, but also suggests that it should be earmarked, or dedicated for health promotion or, whatever related uses. And so there's that opportunity. And if you tie it in with the concept of polluters pay, which is also separate, right? So your legal basis on the one hand is the FCTC and its guidelines on Article 6. And now you also have this polluters pay principle. And the challenge with polluters pay principle is that you need to cost out, how much the damage is, and then you could charge it to the polluter. And I think there is an opportunity because an even probably better opportunity, because with a polluter pay principle, it's not just taxes. Taxes is one mode. You could be talking about surcharges. You could be talking about fees or even penalties, right? You ask them to pay for cleanup. That's a charge or a fee. And so there are several opportunities that we could be tapping. And I think it's crucial for the African region. So I think the two most exploited regions in terms of the environment is Africa and Asia, right? And so this is the places where we should be focusing on when we think about polluters pay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. You tied it all back to the environmental aspect for us. I think this was really great to hear. We have a comment/question from Dapu, who says, hello, thank you once again. He or she would like to know if there's a good tobacco and bad tobacco. Pretty much stating, are the tobacco products sold in supermarkets better than those sold on the streets or on the countryside? I'm guessing like outside of the city. I would say there's no good or bad tobacco. It's all bad, but I'll let one of the panelists answer. So Bode, maybe?
I think that's one of those greenwashings that we're talking about. Even when you look at the way the color evolution of tobacco companies, you see they are using much more nicer colors, much more eye-friendly colors. There is no good tobacco. There is no bad tobacco. Tobacco companies will come and tell you that small good tobacco is bad. No, every tobacco is bad, and there is no safe level of exposure to tobacco. Across Africa now, they are trying to create new kind of brands. Like for instance, in Nigeria, there is what they call the Rothman switch. And they're trying to make you think that these are better than the other ones. That is not true. In fact, studies have shown that some of these so-called new products actually get you more addicted, makes you to smoke more sticks than ordinarily we could have done, because they feel nicer, they possibly are easily inhaled than the old tobacco. So that is erroneous. It is part of those lies that the tobacco industry use to get our people hooked into smoking.
Thank you, Bode. I absolutely agree with you. I think they also make sure that it's sort of like a marketing scheme because it attracts a lot of young people, right? Whether it's by the flavoring or the packaging or advertising they use in order to sort of just get more younger people, the youth, to sort of attract them. But as you said, there's no good or bad. It's all equally bad. And sometimes those that have flavors are even worse than the original ones, but they're all bad. There is another question from Ade Busola. I'm hoping I'm saying this well. Is the government in Africa aware of the environmental harms of tobacco farming? And are they interested in addressing climate change? Question. Bode, then maybe we can ask Deborah. Bode, you're on mute.
Yes.
There we go.
I don't think they have deep knowledge. They don't have enough knowledge of how deep tobacco farming harms the environment. Or maybe they do know and they pretend not to know, which is worse. So for me, it is with the theme of this year's World No Tobacco Day, we now have enough reason to take this back to them to say, look, these are the problems that tobacco causes on the environment. Now, back to the issue of climate change. I think every government in Africa is talking about their climate change response. It's the fun thing to talk about now. Now, on the flip side is that what exactly are they doing? Take, for instance, a lot of African governments made commitments at the last Conference of Parties of Climate Change, including my own government. But I bet, and with due respect, if you ask some of those presidents what they read 2 minutes after, I'm very sure they don't know. Now, it is our responsibility to hold them accountable. I mean, for me, my organization currently now, we're about to do 3 studies in 3 African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and I think Kenya, looking at those commitments that African governments made and what steps have they taken. Take, for instance, in Nigeria, so much is being said by the president and our vice president about climate change, but all we heard was there was a climate change act that was passed, and that was it. A law doesn't just make like that. It's not enough for climate change response. So it's also for us to hold them accountable, to do what is right, to call them out as CSO, to continue to put pressure until our governments across Africa begin to do what is right.
Okay. Thank you, Bode. So would you say there is a lack of knowledge and also like maybe a space for capacity building or sort of like partnering as far as like people that are in environment and tobacco control to sort of come together and work on this?
So for the CSOs, I'll say there is a need for us to link up with the environmental movement so that the way we're calling out Shell, Chevron, agribusiness, we can begin to call out tobacco control as a major contributor to climate change, civil society movement. Now, for the government, I think there is a lack of political will in the first instance. You know, they speak about climate change, but they do very little about taking concrete actions to end climate change. There are so many issues that are involved. There's climate financing. As you said, there's also capacity in terms of having in-depth knowledge about some of these things. But I think African government needs to demonstrate more political will on issues of climate change than just, agreeing to, agenda set up by the West. I'm for an African response to climate change. That's what we begin to think about. We are going to be highly impacted, and so we should know what we moving for what we call just transition, just response to climate change, where those that have historically polluted the environment, those that have fleeced us and are continue to fleece us of our natural resources, destroying our environment, will have to pay substantially for the remediation and the response that we need to tackle climate change. That's what I think our government should begin to coalesce around now.
Thank you so much, Bode. That makes a lot of sense. There's, a need to make sure that it fits the context, fits the continent's nuances, cultures, and all of the above. So, Deborah, would you like to speak on this very quickly before maybe we move to the last questions? I know that it's been an hour, so we need to be closing. So maybe before I hand back the mic to Bettina, would you like to chime in on this?
Right. Well, this is really for more in general, not just the African countries, but we know that governments are aware of the environmental harms because they actually receive tobacco industry funding to help solve these problems. They appear in the corporate social responsibility activities of the tobacco industry, to sort of recognize, tree planting activities and all that. So they do see it, but of course they're getting their information from the tobacco industry, not from the civil society advocates. And I think that's the problem that we need to solve. And then for climate change, which is actually linked to the plastics advocacy, I can say for certain that a lot of African countries were very, very active. So I think off the top of my mind, I looked at over 190 states and territories that have some sort of a single-use plastics regulation in place. And I can tell you about, at least a third of the African countries are in there. They have some sort of a national or subnational regulation on single-use plastic. So they've taken this very seriously. And there's no way that you're dealing with single-use plastics without being aware that cigarette filters is, probably the most ubiquitous form of single-use plastic. So they are there, they're aware, but they probably don't know exactly how to deal with it. And they've started with the easier one, which is shopping bags. And again, it falls on civil society, the tobacco control community to raise this level of awareness. And we do need, as Bodhi said, to work with the environmental sector on this. Thank you.
So I see that we're getting a lot more comments and questions. Maybe we'll just take one more question and then Bettina, you can go ahead and take over the moderation again. I saw one from Dr. Senor, and she says hello to everyone. What she's pretty much asking is that for countries who don't really farm tobacco, how can they actually convince government the danger of having tobacco factories in their country, come and open tobacco factories in their country? Because now what they've seen is that since they've started coming and wanting to settle in the country, they also want to grow tobacco in their countries. And they really just don't have sort of enough research to convince government about the devastating effects of tobacco plantations. Should we go with Bode? And then Bettina, you can go ahead and take back the moderation.
Well, I think what we need to do mostly is to get our government to put in place comprehensive legislation along with the FCTC. With very, very strong Article 5.3 principles and guidelines across the board. All right. I think that was what we kind of used in Nigeria when Japan Tobacco wanted to open another factory after we had BAT in Nigeria. If you look at the FCT itself, it did not expressly say do not open cigarette factories, but essentially invoking the principles of demand and supply, And so when we begin to get our government to look at that and then be very clear in letting them know how the costs far outweighs the benefits of having a factory, I think we might be able to make progress. But sometimes when we'll go straight head on to say, do not establish a factory. It might be a little bit adversarial. So let's us use the FCTC in as much as possible to do the convincing for government to know that, look, this is not the right direction to go.
Thank you so much, Bode. So I know that there is a lot more questions, but I'm sure ADCA will figure out a way to send these questions and maybe have them answered by either Bode or Deborah. Thank you again, Bettina. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all the partners and to the participants. And this is my cue to go. Bettina, you handle the moderation.
Thank you, Fatri. It was very interesting. I wish we had more time on this. I think we need another webinar. It's becoming very interesting. Thank you very much. So today, we've heard about the numerous damages inflicted on the environment by the tobacco industry. We also have heard about tobacco growing, manufacturing use, the poison on our water, the soil, the beaches, the city streets with chemicals, toxic waste, cigarette butts, including the microplastics and e-cigarette waste. So we must not fall for the tobacco industry's attempt to try and distract from its environmental harms by greenwashing their products through donations to sustainability initiatives and reporting on environmental standards they often set themselves. We have also been enlightened on why and how we should make the tobacco industry accountable for the environmental destruction it causes. I would like to add that every cigarette smoked or a tobacco product used wastes precious resources that our existence depends on. Tobacco smoke contributes to higher air pollution levels and contains 3 kinds of greenhouse gases. Therefore, smokers must make an effort and be provided the necessary assistance to quit for the good of their health and the health of our planet. Finally, governments and policymakers should support tobacco farmers to switch to alternative or diversified crops, which are more sustainable for livelihoods, to reduce the environmental impact of tobacco growing, the curing process, and the manufacturing. They should do this while continuing to implement effective tobacco control measures. So this brings us to the end of our webinar, and thank you very much to our panelists, Debbie, Akimi Bode, as well as Fatu, who assisted in the question and answer session. Thank you very much to our interpreters, and thank you all our participants worldwide. We had a variety of participants from different continents globally. So thank you all for being with us today, and we wish you a very successful World No Tobacco Day 2022. Thank you.